reality error. The first time felt like a coincidence, a cruel trick of memory. Alex was stuck in the sluggish artery of evening traffic, the kind that turned a 20-minute commute into a 50-minute meditation on brake lights. He was drumming his fingers on the steering wheel, his mind a million miles away, somewhere in the spreadsheets and quarterly reports that had consumed his day. A silver sedan, 2 cars ahead and 1 lane over, signaled to merge in front of him. He tapped his brakes, letting the driver in with a sigh. And then he saw it. The license plate. 7G3R1P. The sequence of letters and numbers struck him with a physical force, like a splash of ice water. His breath hitched. It was a nonsensical reaction to a random string of characters, but it wasn't random to him. Not at all. His mind, without his permission, flickered back 17 years. He was a teenager then, riding his bike home on a late summer afternoon. The air smelled of cut grass and hot asphalt. Then came the screech, a sound so violent it felt like the sky was being torn open. He had looked up just in time to see a dark green station wagon lose control, swerving wildly before wrapping itself around a thick oak tree on the side of Old Mill Road. He remembered the silence that followed the noise. A profound, unnatural quiet. He had dropped his bike and run towards the wreck, his heart hammering against his ribs. The front of the car was an accordion of crushed metal. Steam hissed from the ruined engine. He saw the license plate, somehow undamaged, bent but perfectly legible. 7G3R1P. He never forgot it. He could not forget it. The image was seared into his brain, a permanent scar on his memory, linked forever to the sight of the slumped, unmoving figures inside the car. Now, here it was, decades later, attached to a pristine silver sedan in downtown traffic. Alex shook his head, a small, tight motion. It was impossible. Plates get retired, destroyed. Especially plates from a vehicle involved in a fatal accident. It had to be a different plate. Maybe it was 7G8R1P. Or 7C3R1P. His memory was playing a game with him, dredging up old trauma and pasting it onto the present. That was the logical explanation. The only explanation. He focused on the car, trying to find a flaw in his recollection. The traffic inched forward. The silver sedan moved with it, its taillights glowing placidly. He squinted. No, it was unmistakable. The font, the spacing. 7G3R1P. He felt a cold dread begin to seep into his bones, a feeling wholly separate from the sadness of the old memory. This was something else. This felt active. He finally pulled into his apartment building's parking garage, the encounter leaving a sour taste in his mouth. He dismissed it as he walked to the elevator. The human brain is a funny thing, he told himself. It sees patterns where there are none. It finds echoes of the past in the noise of the present. By the time he had microwaved his dinner, the incident had been filed away under unsettling but explainable. 3 days later, he saw it again. He was walking to a coffee shop on his lunch break, enjoying a rare bit of sunshine. A delivery van rumbled past, its diesel engine chattering. He paid it no mind until his eyes caught the faded, grimy plate on its back bumper. 7G3R1P. This time, there was no mistaking it. No room for doubt. It was the same sequence. On a completely different vehicle. A battered, rust-spotted commercial van, nothing like the sleek sedan from the other day. Alex stopped dead on the sidewalk. People flowed around him, an indifferent current. He stared after the van until it turned a corner and disappeared, leaving only the faint smell of exhaust. The cold dread from before returned, no longer seeping but flooding. This wasn't a coincidence. Coincidences happen once. This was a pattern. A broken rule. His logical mind scrambled for a foothold. A clerical error at the DMV? Someone hacking the system to issue duplicate plates? It sounded like a conspiracy theory, the kind of thing you read about in late-night internet forums. It was absurd. But the alternative, the one whispering from the dark corners of his mind, was that something was wrong. Not with the DMV, not with a computer system. Something was wrong with the world itself. And it was trying to get his attention. The rest of the day at work was a blur. The numbers on his screen seemed to shift and swim. He kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see a unicycle with that plate bolted to its frame. The thought was so ridiculous it almost made him laugh, but the laughter died in his throat, choked by a profound and growing fear. What had he seen all those years ago? And what was seeing him now? Sleep offered little escape. Alex's dreams were a frantic slideshow of twisted metal and the unchanging, stark white plate with its black lettering. He would wake up with his heart pounding, the sequence 7G3A1P echoing in the silent darkness of his bedroom. The world felt thin, like a photograph he could poke a finger through. During the day, he found himself scanning every car, every truck, every motorcycle with a kind of obsessive vigilance. It was a terrible way to live, constantly searching for the very thing he dreaded finding. For a week, nothing happened. The city's traffic was just a random assortment of normal license plates again. A part of him, the rational, desperate part, began to hope it was over. A fluke. A weird, week-long hallucination brought on by stress. He decided he needed proof, a solid anchor in reality to either confirm his fears or dispel them. He needed to know the facts of the crash. On a Saturday afternoon, he drove to the public library, the quiet, dusty atmosphere a welcome balm to his frayed nerves. He sat at a microfilm reader, the machine humming and clicking as he scrolled through archived editions of the local newspaper from 17 years ago. His hands felt clammy. He found the date easily. He scrolled past articles about city council meetings and local sports. Then he saw the headline: Family of 4 perishes in single vehicle accident on Old Mill Road. His breath caught. He zoomed in, the grainy black and white photo of the wreck filling the screen. It was exactly as he remembered. The dark station wagon, crumpled like a discarded piece of paper against the unyielding trunk of the oak tree. The article was brief, clinical. It listed the names of the victims, a family he didn't know. It mentioned the time of the accident and the ongoing investigation. And there, at the end of the second paragraph, was the detail he was looking for. The vehicle, a 1998 green Ford Taurus wagon, was registered with the license plate 7G3R1P. A wave of nausea washed over him. So he hadn't imagined it. He wasn't misremembering. It was real. The plate was real, and it had been on that car. A car that was most certainly crushed, dismantled, and turned into scrap metal well over a decade ago. He printed the article, the flimsy paper feeling heavy in his hand, like a verdict. The librarian gave him a curious look as he left, his face pale. The sightings began again the next day, and with a new, more sinister quality. They were no longer just on cars. He was in the grocery store, staring blankly at a wall of cereal boxes, when his eyes focused on the digital scale in the produce section. A bag of apples sat on it, and the red LED display showing the price read $7.63. He blinked, thinking it was a stretch. But then the weight displayed shifted to 1.91 pounds. His mind did the math automatically. 19 is the 19th letter of the alphabet, S. No, wait. 1 for A, 2 for B. 18 is R, 16 is P, R, P, G is the 7th letter. 3, 7G3. RIP. The I was missing. He felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. Was he forcing the pattern? Or was it learning to be more subtle? He abandoned his cart and fled the store. Later that week, at work, he was asked to generate a security token for a client's account access. The system spat out a long, randomized string of alphanumeric characters. In the middle of the gibberish, nestled like a snake in the grass, was 7G3R1P. No hyphens this time. Just the raw sequence. He quickly generated a new one, his heart hammering against his ribs. His boss, Mr. Henderson, walked by his cubicle. "Everything all right, Alex? You look like you've seen a ghost." Alex just nodded, unable to form words. The fear was evolving. It was no longer about a haunted object. It felt like an infection, a piece of rogue code spreading through the operating system of his reality. It wasn't just following him on the roads anymore. It was seeping into the data streams, the random noise of the world, specifically targeting him. He thought about telling someone, his friend Ben, maybe. But how would he even start? "Hey Ben, I think a license plate from a car crash I saw as a kid is stalking me through random number generation." He would be scheduling a psychiatric evaluation before he even finished the sentence. He was alone with it. The thread had been pulled, and his entire world was beginning to unravel, stitch by horrifying stitch. And he had a terrible, sinking feeling that he knew who was holding the other end. The world began to lose its texture. Colors seemed duller, sounds flatter, as if a filter had been placed over his perception of reality. The only thing that remained sharp and vivid was the pattern. It had moved beyond the visual, creeping into the auditory. It started subtly. The hum of his refrigerator would seem to pulse in a specific rhythm. A long hum, 3 short ones, a long one, another long one, and a final short one. He would stand in his kitchen in the middle of the night, listening, trying to convince himself it was just a mechanical quirk. But he knew it wasn't. It was the cadence of the sequence. 7 G 3 R I P. One evening, while driving home from work, he had the car radio on, tuned to a talk station to fill the silence. The signal began to break up, dissolving into a blizzard of static. Alex reached to change the station, but his hand froze. Through the hiss and crackle, a voice was speaking. It wasn't the radio host. It was a monotone, synthetic voice, like an early text-to-speech program. It was faint, buried deep in the noise, but it was there. 7 G 3. Alex slammed the power button, plunging the car into silence. He sat for a moment, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, the only sound the frantic thumping of his own blood in his ears. He was losing his mind. That was the only rational conclusion left, and yet it didn't feel true. This wasn't chaos. It was organized. It was intelligent. This felt less like a breakdown and more like a siege. His apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage where the walls were closing in. He started covering things up. He put a piece of tape over the digital clock on his microwave. He stopped looking at receipts. He read books instead of browsing the internet, terrified of what a CAPTCHA or a randomly generated ad ID might show him. He was trying to starve it, to deny it the canvas of his attention. But it was persistent. It was clever. One morning, he woke up to find condensation had formed on his bedroom window. In the thin film of moisture, traced with impossible precision, were the characters 7G3R1P. It was as if a finger had drawn them from the outside, on the 5th floor of a sheer brick building. He stumbled back from the window, a cry of pure terror catching in his throat. He spent the rest of the day in a stupor, calling in sick to work. He couldn't face the numbers on his computer screen. He couldn't face the possibility of Mr. Henderson asking him if he was all right again. His isolation was almost complete. He ignored calls from his mother and texts from Ben. Explaining his situation was impossible, but his silence was becoming an explanation in itself. That something was deeply wrong with Alex. He knew he should seek help, see a doctor, a therapist. But he was paralyzed by a specific fear. What if they put him on medication, and it made the pattern go away? That should have been a comfort, but it terrified him. If a pill could stop it, it would mean it was all in his head. But if it was all in his head, what did that say about the window pane? About the radio? The fear was that he was saying that this was real. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. He had forced himself to go to work, to pretend to be normal. As he was leaving the office building that evening, he saw it parked across the street. A 1998 Ford Taurus station wagon. Dark green. It was not a rusted wreck. It was immaculate, gleaming under the streetlights as if it had just rolled off the showroom floor. And on its bumper was the plate. 7G3R1P. Alex froze, his briefcase slipping from his numb fingers and hitting the pavement with a dull thud. This was different. This wasn't just the plate on a random car. This was the car. The ghost. He stared, expecting it to flicker or fade. But it remained solid, real, its presence a silent, screaming violation of every law of physics and time. The street was busy with people heading home, but no one else seemed to notice the pristine vintage car parked in a tow-away zone. They walked past without a glance. It was there only for him. He took a hesitant step forward, then another. He had to know who was driving. He had to see. He fixed his eyes on the driver's side window, which was tinted so dark it looked like a black hole. As he stared, a slow, horrifying realization dawned on him. There was no one there. The car was empty. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his soul, that it was waiting for him. He never knew how long he stood on that sidewalk, staring at the impossible green car. Time seemed to stretch and warp around the vehicle, the flow of pedestrians and traffic becoming a distant, unimportant blur. The car was the only thing that was real. It was a fixed point of wrongness in a world that was rapidly losing its coherence. He felt a pull, a strange and dreadful curiosity that was stronger than his fear. He had to get closer. He had to understand. But as he took another step toward the curb, a city bus lumbered past, obscuring his view. When it was gone, so was the car. The space it had occupied was empty, just a patch of asphalt under a flickering streetlight. He went home, but he didn't sleep. The image of the car, perfect and silent, was burned onto the inside of his eyelids. It was no longer just haunting him, it was inviting him. The next morning, he knew what he had to do. The idea had been lurking in the back of his mind for weeks, a final, desperate option that he had been too afraid to consider. Now, there was no other choice. He couldn't run from it. He couldn't hide from it. He had to go to the source. He had to go back to Old Mill Road. He called in sick to work again, his voice a hoarse whisper on the phone. He didn't care if they fired him. Spreadsheets and quarterly reports belonged to a world that no longer existed for him. His only job now was this terrible pilgrimage. The drive out of the city was surreal. The familiar highways and landmarks felt alien, like a landscape in a dream he couldn't wake from. He drove mechanically, his thoughts focused on that summer afternoon 17 years ago. On the sound of the crash. On the sight of the plate. He had been just a witness then, a bystander. But now it seemed that he had been chosen. Noticed by something that had been sleeping in the wreckage. Old Mill Road hadn't changed much. It was still a two-lane country road, winding through dense woods and patches of farmland. The trees were older, their branches hanging lower over the asphalt. He slowed the car, his eyes scanning the side of the road. He found it easily. The oak tree. It was immense now, thicker and taller, but he recognized the slight curve in the road just before it. On its trunk, about 4 feet up, was a deep, gnarled scar in the bark, a permanent pucker in the wood where the station wagon had made its impact. He pulled his car onto the gravel shoulder across from the tree and shut off the engine. The silence that descended was profound, broken only by the chirping of insects and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. It was the same silence he remembered from the day of the crash. He sat in his car waiting. He didn't know what he was waiting for, but he felt a sense of inevitability, as if he were an actor who had just walked onto a stage, waiting for his cue. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The woods grew darker, the shadows deepening. And then it appeared. It didn't drive up the road. It was simply there. One moment, the spot on the shoulder beside the oak tree was empty. The next, the dark green station wagon was sitting there, as solid and real as the tree itself. Its paint was perfect, reflecting the colors of the sunset. Its tires were new, and its license plate, 7G3R1P, seemed to absorb the fading light, the characters standing out with stark clarity. Alex's heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of his chest, but he did not scream. The terror was so absolute that it had become a kind of calm. This was it. The confrontation. He watched as the driver's side door of the green car swung open with a soft, clean click. No one got out. The doorway was a rectangle of perfect, featureless black. It wasn't just dark inside. It was a void, an absence of space and light that seemed to drink in its surroundings. He knew he should start his car and speed away. He knew he should never look back. But he couldn't. He was being called. With a trembling hand, he opened his own car door and stepped out onto the gravel. The crunch of his shoes sounded unnervingly loud in the twilight stillness. He started walking across the road, towards the open door and the silent, waiting dark. Each step across the asphalt was a deliberate act of will, a surrender to the illogical horror that had consumed his life. The air grew cold as he approached the green station wagon. It was a dead cold, a stillness that had nothing to do with the evening temperature. It was the cold of a place where warmth had never existed. He stopped a few feet from the open door, his gaze fixed on the rectangle of absolute blackness that was the car's interior. It was not empty in the way a normal car is empty. It was a hole in the world. No seats, no dashboard, no steering wheel. Just a silent, bottomless void that seemed to hum at a frequency just below his hearing. He peered into the darkness, and the darkness stared back. From the depths of that void, something began to shift. It wasn't a shape he could recognize, not a face or a body. It was more like a glitch in his vision, a distortion in the nothingness. It was a non-thing, a presence defined only by the absence it created. He felt a pressure in his mind, a silent communication that was not made of words or images, but of pure, unadulterated understanding. He suddenly knew what this was. It wasn't the ghost of the family who had died here. They were long gone, their tragedy just an incidental anchor point. This was something else entirely. Something that had been drawn to the intense emotion of the crash, to the nexus of trauma and death. A predator that fed not on flesh and blood, but on patterns and perception. It had noticed him that day, the young boy on the bicycle, the one who had stared so intently at the wreckage. It had latched onto the most potent symbol of his trauma, the license plate, and had been using it ever since. It was a lure. All of it. The sightings, the numbers on the scale, the voice in the static, the drawing on the window. It had been a long, patient process of grooming. It had been teaching him its language, tuning his mind to its frequency, isolating him and marinating him in a very specific flavor of fear. It wasn't just haunting him, it was preparing him. A wave of dizzying clarity washed over Alex. He wasn't going crazy. He was being assimilated. The thing in the car wasn't going to lunge out and grab him. It didn't need to. The process was already complete. He felt a strange tingling sensation all over his skin, a feeling of dissolving and reforming. He looked down at his own hands, and for a split second, they seemed to flicker, the image wavering like a poor television signal. He broke his gaze from the void inside the car and turned, slowly, to look back at his own vehicle, parked on the other side of the road. It was a simple, gray sedan. He knew his license plate. He'd renewed his registration just last month. It was 9K2XJ4. But that is not what he saw. Bolted to the back of his car, gleaming in the last vestiges of twilight, was a stark white plate with black lettering. 7G3R1P. A choked gasp escaped his lips. He looked back at the green station wagon. It was fading, becoming translucent, the trees behind it showing through its form. The open door closed with no sound, and the entire car dissolved into the twilight, leaving nothing behind but the scent of ozone and the deep silence of the woods. He was alone. He stumbled back to his car, his mind a howling emptiness. He reached for the driver's door, his hand shaking uncontrollably. He looked at his wrist, at the digital watch he always wore. The numbers on the display were gone. In their place, glowing faintly, was the sequence, 7G3R1P. He felt a final, terrifying shift inside him. The fear was gone, replaced by a hollow sense of purpose. The memories of Alex, the accountant who lived in the city, were fading, becoming distant and unimportant, like a story he'd read a long time ago. He got into the car. His car. He started the engine, its sound perfectly normal, yet utterly alien. He did not drive home. He simply pulled onto the road and began to drive, with no destination in mind. He was part of the pattern now. He was the echo. He was a new lure, cast back into the world, waiting patiently for the next person to notice the plate, for the next curious mind to be caught on the hook and slowly, inevitably, reeled in.